Turning to me becomes surrender to me. Taken from recognition of me is liberation. By his divine presence, avatar Adidar Samraj. Devotee, I have become more and more sensitive not only to the myth of Narcissus, but to all the cultural and personal myths that I live by. How much do I need to be aware of all the myths feeding into the big myth of Narcissus? Or should I just continue to surrender this primary myth of Narcissus to you? Adidar, what form does that surrender take? Devotee, it is feeling you all the time, becoming more aware of you. Adidar, the fundamental practice is whole bodily devotional turning to me. Surrendering the myth of separate self is not a technical practice that I have given you, not in such words. The actual practice is the turning of the principal faculties of the body-mind complex to me, in and as my bodily human divine form, avatarically self-manifested. The practice of devotion to me is not about conceiving of a separate I that you then surrender, but I assume your practice corresponds to the fundamental practice I have given you, which is simply turning to me. That being said, what exactly is your question? Devotee, in the course of doing this surrendering of the faculties to you, avatar Adidar, turning them to me. Devotee, turning the faculties to you. Adidar, yes, there is a difference. To surrender the faculties to me is a kind of working on yourself that does not become surrender. Simply turning the faculties to me, regardless of their content or tendency, is the practice. In due course, that turning demonstrates itself as surrender to me, not as an intentional act or presumed practice, but spontaneously. You do not surrender the total body-mind to me, but you turn the total body-mind to me responsively, not in the form of working on yourself, but responsively, in response to me. Devotionally recognizing me and feeling toward me, you turn the faculties to me, moment to moment. Turning to me demonstrates itself as surrender to me, when that turning becomes a truly effective practice in the midst of the total life discipline I have given you. But the practice of turning to me is not about seeking to surrender to me. That understanding is very basic to right practice of devotion to me. Devotional turning to me is not an intentional act of surrender, not a form of working on yourself. To work on yourself is not an ego-transcending practice. That is a seeking practice. That is itself a manifestation of egoity. But responsively turning to me is not an egoic act. It is an ego-transcending act, done entirely on the basis of devotional response to me. Therefore, devotionally responsive turning to me is the basis for surrender to me. True surrender to me is not an effort to surrender. In the years in which I was associated with Rudy, his instruction was to tear your guts out, just work on yourself, to open yourself up. He would use a physical gesture of tearing his guts out, always working to surrender. When I engaged this practice in Rudy's company, its nature as egoic activity itself, as seeking, was made obvious to me. The fruitlessness of that kind of practice became utterly clear to me, and the impulse to engage the practice fell away. You do not have to tear your guts out or work against yourself in order to surrender to me. That is not how surrender works. You simply turn to me because you want to, because you are moved to. If you are enamored by someone, you do not have any trouble looking at that person, or wanting to see that person, or remembering that person. You cannot get that person off your mind. That is because you are responding to that person. If you met somebody who is totally unattractive to you, you would not give him or her a second thought, and you would really have to work on yourself to keep him or her in your mind. But when somebody is attracted to you, you cannot get that person off your mind. I am using this metaphor to point out the error of the method of effortful self-surrender, the error of working on yourself to get yourself to be surrendered when you are anything but surrendered and you do not really want to surrender. You cannot surrender by working on your non-surrender, because you are working on your non-surrender as something rather objective to yourself, and therefore surrender does not happen. The reality way of Adidam is about surrender to me. The devotional relationship to me is about surrendering to me. But how does surrender to me come about? It comes about through practicing the reality way I have revealed and given, not by merely idealizing surrender as something to be achieved. If you listen to me and truly understand my instruction to you, you will see that the practice of whole bodily devotional turning to me is, in fact, something you can do. Devotional turning to me is intrinsically ego-transcending, and it becomes surrender without your seeking to be surrendered. Therefore, to turn to me devotionally is an entirely different approach to surrender than what has been practiced in the great tradition of humankind. Devotional turning to me is the effective approach or way that is the basis of true surrender. Devotional turning to me is responsive, not self-conscious. Thus, it is quite the opposite of the practice I engaged in Rudi's company, based on his instruction. The practice of true or responsive and non-effortful surrender is what the reality way of Adidam is about. Therefore, you must come to a right understanding of that practice, and you must cultivate that practice, that understanding, by constantly studying my teaching word about that practice. You must engage that practice seriously, not only in cultural circumstances such as the communion hall, but in the moment-to-moment context of your life. That means you bring yourself to discipline the various functional, practical and relational activities of life, such that they are modes of turning the faculties to me, and are thus and thereby conformed to me. That is what the disciplines do. They are not a something in and of themselves. They are not done merely in order to idealize certain behaviors or achieve some kind of social changes. The disciplines in the reality way of Adidam are modes of turning the principal faculties of the body-mind self to me, such that turning to me is done under all functional, practical, relational and cultural circumstances. The disciplines I have given you are the how that happens. Therefore, those disciplines are all extensions of a whole bodily devotional turning to me. The modes of the conscious process and conductivity practice are likewise extensions of that turning to me. Supports for it, secondary but necessary means, all done in devotional response to me. All the by me given disciplines and practices are simply about turning to me. That turning to me shows itself as surrender to me, which in turn shows itself as the searchless beholding of me. Therefore, when the practice of whole bodily devotional turning to me is true, searchless beholding of me is the evidence shown. When there is searchless beholding of me, then there is a sensitivity to me, in which I am tangibly, transcendentally, spiritually experienced. Searchless beholding of me is not a method for awakening some kind of presumed spiritual energy in your own egoic person. The transcendental spiritual process in my company is not Kundalini Yoga. It is the divine yoga. It is the orientation of searchlessness, merely beholding me, turned to me, with all the faculties in all functional, practical, relational, and cultural circumstances. Searchless beholding of me is inherently a unique form of receptivity, in which my unique transcendental spiritual self-transmission of my own person and state can be felt, and that receptivity shows itself through the unique signs that are the characteristic transcendental spiritual signs of this way. The only by me revealed and given reality way of Adidam, and that lead to the perfect practice rather directly through a real process in finite time. The practice of Adidam leads to the perfect practice if done seriously, rightly, exactly as I instruct you. It is not a self-guruing game. It is not merely a philosophy or a technique or a self-manipulative method. It is none of those things. Do not turn my teaching revelation into something else because of your lack of study or your misunderstanding, or simply as a result of your obstinacy in maintaining your own bondage and habit patterning of gross egoity or any other mode of egoity. Thus, the practice is as I have stated it, not as you restate it. Therefore, you must understand my teaching revelation and embrace it as it is revealed to you, as I have given it to you. Da.